Hey, everybody. Welcome to the stream. Boy, it's going to be an exciting one today. I had, so those of you who don't know me, my name is Jeff Outlaw. I'm the CXO at YOM. That means Chief Experience Officer, kind of means a little bit of COO, a little bit of Creative Director. What we are at YOM is we've created a decentralized cloud gaming network, a peer-to-peer cloud gaming network, which makes cloud gaming actually work at a low cost and at low latency. All the documents about our project, if you're not familiar with us, you can go to yom.oo and see all the information there. And again, reach out to us. We're happy to talk about what we've created and demo the product for you. What we're doing today is about maybe a week and a half ago, I got a hold of this report that Matthew Ball created. Now, I'll go through who he is, but this report's data dense, and I wanted to, obviously we want to get information when you're making decisions. This is a really great way to do that. Let me go ahead and bring up the presentation, and I'll show you what I mean. So if you haven't sat down and got your cup of coffee, maybe I'll give you a few seconds to go get your coffee or a hot chocolate or tea, whatever it is that you're drinking. You won't need it for the caffeine. You just need to relax and kind of get all this information in. Again, let me bring up my screen, and we will show you what I mean. So Matthew Ball, if you're not familiar with who he is, he's an author, researcher. He wrote this book here, The Metaverse. Yeah, I should go ahead and describe this scene here. So he's a researcher, an author. He does a lot inside the gaming world. A lot of great people say great things about him. He's got quotes from Tim Sweeney and Mark Zuckerberg and Phil Spector. So what he's created in this report is looking at the gaming industry in 2025 and where we're starting at, which is, I think, important for us as we build what we're doing with our solution. But it also talks to all the other things that are going to affect us in the industry entirely, not just here at YOM, but in the industry in its entirety. Where he starts from, and again, just a little bit of caution, as I go through this first part of the presentation, don't get too down, don't get too depressed. There's uplifting goals by the time we get to the end. There's a lot of upsides, but we do want to be realistic about where we're starting from and why we have to take a look at our industry and find out, what's the path forward for us. Because as he says, as a title for this very first section is, it's been a rough 3 years at the end of the 2011 to 2021 growth wave. So what does he mean about that, about a growth wave? In the years from 1990 to 2011, there was about a 4.5% compound annual growth rate in the gaming industry. But then come 2011, boy, things rocketed up. Again, more than double the compound annual growth rate. We were doing very, very well. And my career goes back to 2000. So I've been in the industry during that entire spurt of growth. So I can say I've had a pretty good run at it. And what was projected by many people after 2021 was continued growth. I mean, some people had it very, very high. Some people had it modestly high. None of them had it correct. It actually ended up being a bit of a slump. The last 3 years, the industry has hit a slump. And so he goes through in the beginning of this report some of the reasons for this. Again, if you haven't ever met Matthew or haven't heard of Matthew Ball before, I do want you to take a look at his website. I don't want to take any credit away from him. This is a lot of information, and I can't take anything away from him. It was his report that got me this far along. So what were some of the causes of this slump? It wasn't that there weren't great games. There were absolutely a lot of really great games that came out in this period. So, and as he says, arguably some of the best games, right? So if that's not the reason, what does he want to point to? Oh, actually, let me just go back 1 second. I want to make sure I get all my notes. I've got some notes on this, and I want to make sure I hit them all. So, oh yes, the important piece to recognize here is that, gaming slumped a little bit. So it did everything slump after the pandemic, after people kind of got back to their lives, but that's not the case. Books, music, streaming videos, they all had an increase in revenue, some of them all the way up to 14%. So it wasn't that people just stopped spending money. Gaming itself, by itself, had a slump, and we need to know what causes that. All right. So again, the emphasis, the yellow underlining is mine, right? So it wasn't that people were not just declining in player numbers, but it was in the average spend also. And what he links this to is the people who were modestly engaged, they stopped coming around. So the hardcore gamers, they didn't go anywhere, and they were still spending some money. But the ones who were kind of middle of the road, they walked away. So that's part of the reason why. This shortfall did lead to some serious flops. No other way really to say it. Games that disappointed people. I guess there's another way to say it. Multiverses. I was excited for that game. Gotham Knights, excited for that one as well. To have games like this with these kinds of, and the Avengers properties, to have properties with big IP attached to them fail, it's something that's really kind of sad, honestly, for our industry. But again, we're going to get some of the reasons for these. Obviously, what this led to was VCs were pulling back their funding. Studios were having to let go of staff. I've got just today a whole bunch of friends who worked at Meta. Well, I just found out today that they did another cut over at Meta. So studios are letting go of people. They're killing experimental projects. That seems to be part of the trend, is the when your studios are going to go back to what they know or what they perceive has always succeeded and do that same game over and over again, which of course is killing the creativity that actually is needed to help the industry flourish. What drove prior 10 years of growth and change? Why was it from 2011 to 2021 there was so much growth? That's a good question to ask. Well, he's got it set up as this confluence of different pieces, right? And not any one of them individually, although some of them individually, but most of them kind of fed into each other, right? You had a lot more people buying mobile devices in that 10-year period, but now we've kind of capped off. There's not a lot of people who haven't already got a phone. Most people who are going to get a phone have already got it. There are some people who buy an upgrade, but now mobile phone adoption is kind of capped to population growth. The free-to-play market, right? It helped all that growth. User-generated content, social gaming. So we're going to talk about some of these things and how it plays into more closely with what we've been building when we start talking about the golden, when we get to the uplifting gold section. User-generated content, social gaming services, those will be a big part of what we're going to point to for ourselves. He also talks about how these various things didn't really pan out like they expected to pan out. Cloud gaming, again, the area that we're in, did really, and by the way, the yellow circles are, again, my emphasis, not Matthew Ball's. But cloud gaming had the chance to do more, right? People were talking about how the Google Stadia was very ambitious, right? But it didn't perform as expected. And again, we would point to their technology was not ready for it back at that time. Things have changed now. But then new genres, again, the risk curve has gotten so high, and we'll talk about why that is, that new genres are not being tried any longer. And then, God love it, Web3 gaming, we shot ourselves in the foot by oftentimes being too greedy. We didn't really get the highest talented game developers. They're now coming into the Web3 gaming space, which is great. But oftentimes, a lot of the games that were early launched, they were Ponzi schemes, and we allowed we as an industry allowed it to happen. They got too much of a spotlight, and now they've in some ways poisoned the well. There's a lot of regular traditional gaming companies and people who work in traditional gaming who want nothing to do with crypto or Web3, which is, I think, in the long term they're gonna feel like that's a mistake. But it's completely understandable with the way that we allowed the first wave of Web3 games to be made and get marketed. And in this slide here, he's talking about all the different things that are challenges as we go forward, and or challenges that kind of also hampered that growth in the period or stopped our growth from curving up. So we'll talk on the ones that are, again, my emphasis, all the ones are yellow outlined. We're going to talk about each of these, but they do kind of all fit together and cause all that decline or that leveling off that we've hit in the past 3 years. So as I spoke about, end of mobile user growth. Now with the phones, the phone market is fairly well saturated, and it's requiring population growth to bring the numbers up. But that's also an opportunity, right? Because now there's a lot more mobile games in the hands of all these players who aren't yet able to play AAA quality Unreal games on their phone until we get our network up and live. But if you tuned in earlier to the BGA demo day, I showed off our games working on Unreal game running on my phone and running inside a Telegram. So anyways, cap mobile phone sales, that's going to cap our, the growth. Wasn't familiar with this immediately, but it does entirely make sense now. ATT, IDF, and GAID, those are the systems that gaming studios used to track user data, right? And in 2021, there was a change to the laws, and it made it harder for game studios to grab data. Now, if you know me, I have a bend towards online anonymity. I'm a favor of all those things, and I do like I do have that same understanding of that you don't want Google or Apple or any of these big conglomerates to grab your data not just from one app but from all these different apps and get that cornucopia gives you a view of what each person is, and they can better use that data. Obviously, it can help you, but it also can be kind of invasive. So with these new laws and these new regulations, game studios are not able to get and then remarket to their audience as much as they used to be able to, and that causes a bit of the decline as well in how well the games are able to suit and find the next audience. Google and Apple make more money than all of the games, the non-mobile games published in China from their mobile game stores. It's incredible how much these app stores take and 75 to 85% of it is all profit for them. They don't need to charge that much money to actually get the service to the game developer, but they're happy to take it because they're in many ways a monopoly, right? And again, as we talk about what YOM provides by allowing you to stream your game to any URL or in through Telegram, you get around these stores that have taken such a huge chunk. Again, I think the Apple Store is like 30% of income that comes into a game. 30% of it goes to Apple. Every dollar a person spends in the game on Apple, 30 cents of that goes into Apple's coffers and not to the game developer, which is just, it's a bit of highway robbery. Anyways, the app stores, they act as a gate, as a funnel to game studios to get their game out to the players. So Steam, I'm a fan of Steam. And again, I think there's absolutely a path for us for what we do at YOM to work alongside of Steam. But those game developers who are banking on the idea that their game is going to be made gold because they were able to get it into the Steam store have to take a look at these numbers, right? Still, 80% of the 19,000 games that were released on Steam last year didn't make over $5,000 worth of sales, right? 80%, it's huge. And because you don't reach that $80,000 worth of sales, Steam does what Steam probably ought to do business-wise, is they don't give those games all the social features that promote the game. So it's not that it's not great to know. It's not like they shadow ban the games or anything. It's just they promote the games that are making the most sales and therefore Steam the most money. And there's still just a huge disparity about the games that make it and the ones that don't on Steam. So what we're saying, again, with our system as we get into the uplifting gold section, is that don't just rely on Steam to be your outlet. Use other platforms as well. And again, I would say YOM is one of the very, very good ones. But again, there are limits to what the store can do. It closes the opening for people. This is kind of a sign of a good sign, really. So console games used to have the bulk of the sales and the revenue being generated back in 2004. But now we're at a point where PC games have kind of matched and a little bit outpaced the consoles. So the consoles are starting to kind of on a wane. But of course, that does have an effect on the entire industry. If your studio that you're attached to is focused on console games, right, you're going to have some contraction. This again points towards YOM. So mobile game spend, the revenue generated on mobile games is almost 3 times as much as that's spent on console and PC games. So as we're saying now more and more, if you take that mobile game revenue generation strategy over to a PC game that you're able to put through a mobile phone, built in Unreal, graphically rich, and stream through a cloud gaming system that doesn't cost you an arm and a leg, all the things that we're bringing at YOM, again. And I hate to sound like a commercial, but I mean, I do kind of want to say that this whole report is really about how through inherent feeling on our side, we land at the same place that I think a lot of this information, all this data that comes up through this report kind of points to. But it's really great to know, like mobile games just generate much more revenue. So people are easier for them to spend on a mobile phone through the mobile game spending pattern. And again, now that you can get your detail-rich game on a mobile phone, you've got a better avenue to revenue. Because these games are more graphically rich, those AAA quality games, those open world games, those big games, there's a lot more money that goes into creating those games. So the development cost has gotten much, much higher, and the time to release has gotten much, much longer. Both of these things are leading to an increase in the risk curve, and so therefore a decrease in the amount of creativity and risk taking, right? All this kind of leads to, how should we be rethinking the way that we deliver games? And I'm going to get to that as well when we get to the golden section. So there are more. Take a look at the 2 years, right? There are more users now, and there are more releases now, and there's more user spending. However, it's increased the disparity because there are 150 less games on Steam, grossing over 100,000 this year than was in 2016. We've doubled the user base, and we've tripled the amount of games that get released, and we've doubled the amount of money that's being spent. But it's just going to those top few games, right? And it's not getting spread around to the other games. And again, that's part of the discovery process, and it's part of the it's affecting the risk taking that studios are doing. This is a great concept that it took a while for me to get my head around it, but I love what he's saying here. So the black hole games, right? There, and the reduction of game sampling. Players are really going back to the games or staying with the games that they've known and loved, put a lot of money into, put a lot of investment into, and a very, very small percentage of leisure time on games is spent in a new release. Only 6.5%, but it gets worse. In that 6.5%, only 4 games took up half of that 6.5%. Really, so there's a 3.5 was left for everything else to be discovered. It's a small portion of games that get discovered for new players to new genres and everything, and that is dramatically affecting again these studios. As part of the studio contraction that we're seeing. Here's what how he defines that black hole. Right, again, hundreds of thousands of hours that you've taken to master the game. Right? You've invested a lot of play hours, so it's hard for you to leave the game that you know really well. You spent maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars for all these different upgrades and entitlements and skins and things like that. Again, another thing that keeps you in that game and makes you want to try something new less than ever before. You've also playing with all your friends. Now you've got a social contract with all your buddies who are playing the same game as you are playing. So it's very hard for you to leave and go try something new because all your friends are still at the other one. So unless you leave en masse, which doesn't really happen, people are stuck on the same game they played over and over again. And again, the game developers themselves have spent so much money on the single game to go launch something new and take a risk. They're getting less and less willing to do that, right? So, and then there's that last bit where I find myself falling into this trap all the time. If I've got a few hours to maybe watch a movie, I want to decompress that way. I end up watching a movie I've seen before because I don't want to risk playing a movie that it may not be entertaining to me, right? And the same thing's happening with games. People are going back to the same game over and over again because they can trust that it's going to be good, and they don't want to take a risk on something that's going to be not as much fun. So I found this really interesting, but he's called it Reed's Law. Again, it's that combination that reinforces itself between the game the game you've mastered, the stuff you've bought, and the friends that you've made. All that makes it an even more compounding effect to keep you into that game and not go someplace else. It is interesting, though. There are still, even in all, when you're stuck inside, when players stay with the game that they love so much, the game developers are still having to deal with this other aspect that is not, it's hurting in the long run. And that is to make the next version of the game, they have to up their game. They have to build their teams higher. They got to spend more time because the technology is more intense. And there is still, like you see here, the budgets that get spent on the sequels go up while the user base goes down, or the amount of sales goes down, because there are still people who are just like, well, they played the first one and they enjoy the second one, but by the time they get the third one, either they've gotten older and they don't have that same kind of leisure time, or they've found something else, right? But at the same time, the game developers are on the other side of things saying, we've got to make it better, we've got to make it better, we've got to make it better. And that ultimately just kind of harms them as the users go down, but the cost goes up. The after launch sustainability. So it's Call of Duty being the one that can really make it last. It's tremendous. But again, 3,000 people to make that game. That's a high spend. But what he's kind of showing here is that the after launch support window has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on. because studios just can't afford to keep up the spend to support the games that they've launched, even as much as they want to. I took this. I'll put the slide in here. This is my own, but I wanted to point out that there was much more in the first half of the report that I didn't go into. So Matthew Ball covers the stuff that's going on in Southeast Asia and China, right? That's affecting the markets overseas as more development's happening. It's kind of just, what would you call it? Diluting, I guess, because there's more studios popping up in other parts of the world that didn't exist before, and they're taking away some of the user base and for their games as well. I also didn't cover but he does the AR and VR disappointments that kind of happened in conversion rates in AR and VR in those past 3 years. I won't go into it. I do have a love for VR, but I know it's also not where it needs. We're never even projected it to be as far as adoption. So he asks himself and then answers his own question: what's going on in one sentence? I'm going to try to read it. So hang on, and then I'm going to try to explain it. The exhaustion of decade plus growth drivers that drew players, playtime, and spend coincided with evolving user behaviors, change in monetization models, and growing lock-in effects that exacerbated long-running competitive and budgetary escalations, while growth concentrated in foreign markets that shifted to local productions and then took some share abroad, and occurred alongside acute macroeconomic financial events and epidemics, were worsened by the microeconomic platform policy shifts, as well as the emergence of new and hyper-viral substitutes and foreign-based competition, alongside too many would-be new growth drivers that have not yet to deliver growth. Whew, a mouthful. I try to make it simpler, right? The innovation that led to more growth is not happening. And the business model that supported prior growth will not be sustainable because the audience has changed habits and has more accessibility to other leisure activities, and new markets have brought in new competitors overseas. And I'd also add that the levers that were used in the past, those microeconomic platform policy shifts, the levers that were used in the past to help game developers out, they're not there any longer. So all those things in my mind, in our mind, state a revolution is needed. Let's take a look. Again, this is a cycle that he's talking about that we've been stuck in, where we have stagnant revenues, it makes less profits, so there's less risk-taking and fewer game studios. So you have fewer hits and fewer innovations, and that leads to, again, lower player numbers and lower play time, and which leads, again, to stagnant revenue. So we're caught in this loop, this really not so great loop. But here's where the uplifting gold starts. So a couple of real bright spots. There are some great games that are being made and getting adopted and getting a user base. We can't ignore. I mean, we should not ignore this. But the best part, but this actually was my second favorite slide after the last one. So looking at this slide and some of the important information, these three games here, they're built by solo developers and their successes. I actually know the dude who created Gorilla Tag. Great guy, smart programmer, and that game has done very, very well for him, and he should, because he deserves all the success that he's getting. The idea that solo developers can create success for themselves and something new is important when we talk about what we provide over at YOM. And then here are the growth engines as he sees them, and I think that we would agree. I've underlined the four that I think are most relevant to what we've developed, and the reason, again, why I wanted to give this report. So the user-generated platforms and tools, social gaming services, new game genres, and then AAA mobile gaming. Let's go through each one. So user-generated platforms and tools. This is really interesting information about Roblox. You know, my kids have both played Roblox. They love it. It dwarfs the other platforms by so much. It's so crazy how well Roblox brings kids in, or brings players in to an ecosystem, right? There's a lot of numbers there. And what's interesting about Roblox is, again, it's not the win, shoot, kill necessarily that players don't love. They don't need that loop, right? There's a lot more create and express and share and identify. There's a lot more softer play patterns that get adopted inside of Roblox, which is, I think, again, great. What is interesting to find out is it doesn't generate that much money for the developers. I mean, Roblox themselves as a company do well, right? But the amount of revenue per hour that this generates doesn't equal anything close to the revenue per hour of a PlayStation, Steam, or EA's services. So it's important to again, recognize that. Social game services. So he points to Discord, and I would point to others as well. But it's important to know in the future, the idea of using social media as a way to spread your game around, it's already happening, right? Discord is a place for finding new games that you haven't tried before, and they spread around very, very rapidly. What we're saying with cloud gaming and with our solution is the time that it took before, if I sent you the link to a Steam game, and if you go ahead and decide to download it and install it and update your drivers, and 4 hours later, you and I can play together. But if I'm sending you the link through Discord or through Telegram to the game that's being played on a website, and you and I are playing it instantly, how much faster does that game get adopted and spread virally? I mean, so much more faster. This is a much better system. Again, it also helps to break that top of the chart problem that I think Steam, again, I'm not going to fault them for their business model, but it's certainly having a system like this helps to break that top of the charts, the quagmire that we get caught in. The other thing that he's pointing to as a way to change the cycle that we're in right now is new game genres. And why is that kind of point to us? Well, he talks about the battle royale game genre and how it's exploded in the last couple of years. And much of that, I think he rightly ties to new technology that popped up that supported that game genre. So it wasn't just someone had a great idea for a new game. Someone had an idea for a game that is now supported by new technology that sprung up and supported this new game style. So as we talk about cloud gaming and what we are building and our partnerships with companies like Metagravity, is that idea that we're going to create new game styles that we don't even know exist yet, because the technology to support these new games, AI, concurrency, faster bandwidth, all these things are going to add to more support for a different type of game genre that we're just now learning to make. So again, new game genres. But again, that ability to take that risk has to, I'm going to get to that in a second, I guess. Mobile games with higher fidelity, right? That it was a big promise that it kind of hasn't happened, but the phones have gotten better, right? Oops, I get that? I did. But AAA quality gaming on a mobile phone is going to be an important piece of the next wave, right? This is, so again, I want to point back to the idea that mobile gaming, there's more money spent in mobile gaming than there is in PC games. Again, the mid-tier titles, they're only 12% of the downloads, but 50% of the revenue, right? People spend their money on their phones. It's easier for them to do. But as we come to coming kind of close to the end anyways, this is where it starts to like kind of snowball all up into this. So he takes a look at these 3 items and then balls them together into a network, which is a circle going around. You got the I'll talk about these. The first social 3D generation, improvements in mobile commute, and improvements in cloud game streaming, all strengthened by that mobile to non-mobile wheel effect, where you can go back and forth between your mobile and non-mobile device to play the same game. So if you haven't seen it, it jumped right out at me. Bam, right? He's got the YOM logo right there in the middle of it. How can you not love that? But that was not intentional on his part. But and again, that's just my side. But let me go into one of these. So the first socially 3D generation. This is really saying that the generation that's coming up now has spent more time in 3D than any generation before that, right? And again, our thesis has always been that beyond gaming, the generation that's growing into the 3D, that's growing up now, is going to be looking for 3D to invade things like their social media, their commerce, how they spend money. They're open to the idea that 3D becomes a bigger part of their life. It will open up the idea of a 3D internet. The thing that's been keeping us back from the 3D internet is the idea that it's just too expensive to do, right? So, so we're going to get to how our technology, being as cheap as it is, makes it easier for the internet to go 3D in a reasonable fashion. Phones have gotten better, right? The phone technology has increased. Now the problem has been that while the phone hardware has gotten better, so have the game engine demands. They've also gone up. So Unreal it's a beautiful engine, and again, if you've not seen Unreal, well, no one would have, because we're the ones who've got it. But Unreal running on a phone that looks just like so deep and rich, it's pretty impressive to see. But again, we do that only because, well, two ends of the spectrum, the codecs that we've written and the better hardware on the phones. And again, that network effect, right? The idea that you can now, with this game, with the ability to play these AAA quality games on your mobile device and at home through a website, you're playing the same game. When you play at home and then you have to go to the train to get your ride to work, you can be playing that same game on your mobile device. Your shame account, you're not losing anything by making that. It kind of clumps you together, so you can be playing the same game back and forth on two different devices. Also, for the game developer, it makes it a whole lot easier too. They don't have to troubleshoot and QA every different phone, every different device, because it's always launching through a web browser, right? So there's a lot less of a QA process there. And here, the last slide, and this is really the drive it home moment, that improvements in cloud gaming. So in 2019, Phil Spencer from Microsoft Gaming had said this, and I'll read the quote. I think cloud gaming is years away from being a mainstream way people play. Again, this is back in 2019. I mean, like years and years. So let's take Netflix. It's 20 years old at this point. So it took 2 decades for it to get to the point where shows like House of Cards and Game of Thrones are some of the biggest shows on the planet, mainly watched via streaming. I think game streaming will be faster than 20 years, but it's not going to be 2 years. It's a technological challenge. So again, he's right. It didn't take 2 years. It took 6 years. So here we are in 2025, 6 years later, and we've got that solution that Phil Spencer was talking about when he was talking about this cloud gaming being the solution. All right. I talked a whole lot there. That was 35 minutes nonstop ranting, and I'm generally pretty good at this kind of thing because I enjoy talking about what we're talking about. But I'm going to throw this up there for a quick second. So if you want to read the full report, and again, that full report is 227 pages long. It's dense, but it's totally worth it. If you're in the gaming industry and you haven't read through the report yet, if you're in any kind of decision-making capacity, you should totally be digesting everything that Matthew Ball has said here. If anyone knows him and wants to throw him our way, get him our way, because I'd love to do an interview with him and find out more of what he's talking about here. And at this point, if you haven't yet subscribed to the YouTube channel or haven't started following us on Twitter, please do that, because we don't want you to miss this information as we do this more and more often. I'd like to get some feedback about this presentation, because generally what happens on the town halls on Thursdays, if you're new, is I find I end up talking to somebody else in the industry. 2 weeks ago, we talked to Metagravity. Last week, we talked to Soulbound. I like to find out and put information about the gaming industry out to the community so they can see how what is being built out there is affected by what we're building here too. So anyways, if you haven't subscribed, please do that. If you have subscribed, and even if you haven't, it'd be great if you throw a like on the YouTube video, throw a comment in, and then comment a second time, because that's the pattern that helps the algorithm get this up into more people's feeds so more people can see it. And let's go into some questions, because there are some questions from the chat I'm watching as it happens, and we'll see if we can answer some of these. So what about the PC game migration to consoles and phones? Again, I think what the data here is showing that PC gaming is actually increased over consoles. Consoles is actually diminishing, or at least they're leveling out a little bit. And phones is still overpowering everybody because it's just more easy to get to it, right? The problem that we're solving with our decentralized network, our peer-to-peer connections, is you can play those high-quality, AAA quality games built in Unreal now on your phone with low latency. And I didn't really touch exactly on the cost, but we're talking like a 93% lower cost than you would have with a central server. Central servers are expensive, right? You got to build a building. You got to upgrade the equipment. You got to run the air conditioning. It's super expensive. Our peer-to-peer network is built on people's gaming rigs around the world. So we pay people who have gaming rigs for the amount of game hours that they lend our network. It's kind of like having an Uber, right? It's passive income for people who have the equipment and go to work for a day and their machine, or go to sleep at night and the machine is just not doing anything for them. You can earn money with your equipment with our system, and it's not a small amount of money. It can be quite sizable. There's a calculator. If you go to www.yom.oo, there's a calculator on the website. We'll show you how much you can earn if you wanted to be a node operator. There's a question about peak and the peak system. Will this impact in YOM? So there's been some unrest. Peak has had some delays. Development delays things. It's inevitable. If you work in software, you know that inevitably you're going to have delays. And Peak is having some delays. Is this going to impact YOM in any ways? If yes, what? And if no, how come? I'm going to say no. And the reason why I'm going to say no is because I've spent a career mitigating risk. That's kind of what that my part of my. It's not just me, right? I mean, the whole team. We're smart enough to know and to lessen our dependencies on any one partner or provider. We like Peak. Obviously, they've got the technology has some uses for us that we wouldn't otherwise have. But to say that we're going to tie our ship to any one partner or any one group, it's a chain, right? And available to anybody. It's not like we need them to open a door for us. But anyways, we make sure that we mitigate all those dependencies to make sure that we're not any one thing is going to be any kind of real risk for us. Transmodal gaming ? All right, Cheek. Let's see. Transmodal gaming. I need more information about what that means. And about the logo, how can I get one? If you're talking about this one right here, yeah, it's a new ad. I actually have a little bit of woodworking background, right? So I put it together. And if you ever want to cut a circle, a complete circle like that on a piece of wood, there's a great video out there that'll show you how to do it with a table saw, which is the process I used. And man, it was sweet. It worked out really well. Just waiting for transmodal gaming. I imagine what you're talking there is about going from this device to that device to that device, which again our network allows for. Okay, great. I think we got to the end of it all. Thank you so much for paying attention. Again, I could have done this as a video where I recorded it first, and it wouldn't have been as it would have been much smoother, right? It would have been much cleaner. But I enjoy the chance of doing things live. I like doing things live and platform agnostic gaming. Is that what is on the bridge? Yes, that's exactly what we're saying. So oftentimes people who play on a Mac can't play some of the games that they would want to play because it's going to run inside an emulator, or they don't have it's not so easy to make the Mac version of it. We're talking about playing the games through a web browser, right? So any game, any laptop or any phone, anything that's got a web browser on it should be able to play any of these high-end games that can normally only be played on a high-end gaming rig. That's what we enable. When we say cloud gaming and we say decentralized cloud gaming or peer-to-peer cloud gaming, that's what we're talking about. All right, I'm going to roll. I'm going to get on with my day. It is been about 40 minutes. I'm going to take this and chop it up and put pieces out also. But again, subscribe to the YouTube channel, subscribe to or follow us on Twitter, on X now. And we will catch you next week at this time. Although in 2 weeks, I will be at ETH Denver, so I will not be able to do the town hall in 2 weeks. But next week, we'll have a different guest. We'll talk to you all soon. Thank you very much.